Hey there, good morning, and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So, this is my live stream event for Rock Legends. Today, we're doing bass player, frontman, keyboardist for Rush, Geddy Lee. Yes, the legendary Geddy Lee. I'm sure Geddy would find this amusing. Anyways, basically, what I'm going to talk about is his musical history, the stuff that he has done musically over the course of his, whatever you want to call it, his out in the open kind of media streaming thing, or whatever you want to call it. Anyways, I've been a big fan of Geddy Lee since I was a young man. Probably first discovered him when I was 13. Well, I discovered Rush when I was 13. I was watching, I think it was the Midnight Special, or it might have been one of those other rock music things that was out in that time period. And Rush was playing A Farewell to Kings, and either it was Closer to the Heart or Xanadu. I want to say it was Closer to the Heart just because it was I remember it being so much short. So I think it was Closer to the Heart and A Farewell to Kings were the two songs. And that's where I discovered them. My first impression of the day was typical of my time period, which was, is that a guy or is that a girl? That's the first thing that came out. I wasn't sure because his voice was so high and he had that kind of witch look to him. I'm sorry, Geddy. That's the way I seen it. But I remember thinking their music was different, and that was it. That was my only kind of perception of them at that time. Then a few years, no, not even that, probably later in the summer, we had moved and I had gone to the library, and this particular library near where we lived had records that you could sign out. And they weren't just like classical records, which is what I used to see here and there once in a while. But they had some rock stuff. And one of those rock stuff was the album Fly By Night. Let me see if I can get it out here. I didn't actually prepare for this because I didn't really want to. I just wanted to let it come out naturally. I'm just looking through my collection for it. I don't see it, but I do have it here. Oh, here it is. I was looking too far down. That's what it was. I have this album here. You'll see it on my shirt, Fly By Night, and then, of course, the album. Probably to me, it's their best cover. Best album cover. Just so majestic. I love it. Fantastic album cover. And so they had several albums there by Rush. I think, if I'm correct, they had the Farewell to Kings. I'm just remembering back, Caress of Steel, and this one. This one was the one with the best cover. That's the one I took, because in that time period, I was the same with books. The cover sometimes made the book, as they say. And anyways, I took this album home. I put it on my cheap phono player, and I played it, and I thought, this is really different, because at that point in time in 77, it was all about Kiss. I wouldn't even listen to anything else, but I don't know why. I think it's because of the novelty of the library having rock albums that I decided to take this. I never actually took another album out of there. Never took another one. I just took this one. I had it for 3 weeks. I played it maybe 2 or 3 times and thought, this is very different. But I did like the song Anthem. I remember liking that song. And that, for me, was the beginning for Rush and for Geddy Lee, because he's the front man, right? So anyways, fast forward about 3 years. 3 years? Yeah, 3 years. I was about 16, 19. It's 1980 now. My childhood friend, John, he had bought Rush's A Farewell to Kings and was promoting this band nonstop with me. That was his thing. He liked it. Oh, you got to hear this, and he promote it, and he was always the front runner when it came to discovering things. I cannot think of a single band that I listened to in that time period where it wasn't him that had brought it to my attention. I'm sure there's one or two, but mostly it was him. He brought that to my attention. He kept bringing these guys to my attention. And he was already exploring into other rock bands and stuff like that. And I was still like clinging to my Kiss with desperation, but I knew that the time for Kiss was coming because I was getting bored with their music. I was recognizing that other bands had musicians that, and I don't mean this as a slight to any of the members of Kiss, but these guys had better instrumentation and better musical ineptitude, I guess, if you want to call it, or aptitude. Aptitude's probably a better word. And because I would be listening to some of the stuff he brought, and I thought, wow, that guy's guitar ability is like so amazing, or that drummer is so good. And I inevitably did what most teenagers did and compared it to what I was listening to, and I just found that a little bit short on the end that I was on. So eventually he prodded me and propped me and pushed me out into the limelight, or out into the universe of rock music, and Rush was one of those first bands. I think it was Rush, Sabbath, Queen, there was somebody else, and Styx. Those were the four bands that I began to listen to fairly regularly, mostly because he had Fly By Night, and he had the album Pieces of Eight and Grand Illusion. He also had Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, the one with Bohemian Rhapsody, Day at the Races. And he had, one of my first albums, other that wasn't a Kiss album, was Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell. So that January, or that beginning of that year, 1980, I had 3 albums I purchased within a fairly short period of time. One of them was Permanent Waves. The other one was Heaven and Hell from Black Sabbath. And the last one, I believe, was Drama from Yes, which kind of had a backseat. I found, so the way I looked at it, Black Sabbath was very accessible to me because they weren't that much different than Kiss. Yes, they were heavier, and yes, their music was darker, but they weren't too far of a leap. Rush was a bigger leap, and Yes was too big of a leap at the beginning for me. So, and then of course, right after that, for my birthday, I believe this is around my birthday, someone bought me News of the World from Queen, and all 4 of these albums I loved. I loved them all, and I played them quite a bit. And then that's when it really began for me. So it was probably beginning to mid-month 19, from like January to say June of 1980, where my music interests really started changing. I had been buying Kiss only up until that point. I did have a few other albums that people had purchased for me. One of them was the Boston album, debut album, which my parents had purchased for me in 1976. And then I had not opened it until 1980 because I was so mad because I had asked for Destroyer, and they got me that, and I wouldn't even look at that album. And then I started realizing that album was good, so I started playing it as well. So I did have that Boston thing too. And then after that, it was just whatever money could afford. I would go to the record store in downtown Toronto, usually Sam's, or the other one that Sunrise was just up the street from it on Yonge Street, and purchase what I could afford to get. Usually I got 1 or 2 albums at the most, and I went in there thinking I wanted this one or that one and seeing something else. So sometimes albums didn't get purchased. Just that's the way it was. So, but Rush was the first kind of band to really captivate me. And now you have to understand too, the atmosphere was perfect for them now because Kiss had been waning. The release of their Dynasty album completely pushed it down, and I was being pushed on by my friend to listen to other stuff, and my interests were changing. So with Kiss on the wane, that left the door open for other people to jump in there. Rush was one of the first bands to do that. The fact that they were Canadian helped them. The fact that I had already had some kind of previous kind of exposure to them helped them. Black Sabbath also had some exposure from a K-Tel album that we had when we were about 11 or 12 that had the song Paranoid on it. So I had some exposure to both bands at that point in time, and they were both big that year for me. Both put out the album that it ended up being my favorite album by the band, both of them that year. So big influence. So by the end of 1980, Rush was number one with me. They had replaced Kiss, and Black Sabbath had also passed them, and Kiss was now probably in third at that point in time behind these two bands, Black Sabbath and Rush. Now, Black Sabbath pushed Rush, but they never really ever actually got ahead of them. Rush was the band. So for the next 2 years, probably from 1980, 81, 82 through the Signals album, Rush was the band for me, right? That was the band I wanted to hear. They were my favorite. At first, it really wasn't even close. A little bit of push from Black Sabbath, but not really. And then after that, they got challenged by other groups, but they were primarily the primary guys at that point in time. And to me, Geddy Lee was the guy. I loved his vocal style. I loved his vocals, period. Nobody else could hit those notes. Nobody sounded like him, in my opinion, and that was a good thing. Their music was different, but very intricate. The musicianship was second to none. You know, just everything about them oozed cool, in my opinion. You know, that's the way I thought of them. And Geddy Lee, to me, was the poster boy for the band. At that point in time, I wasn't really into guitar anymore. I had tried that and wasn't into that and wasn't really sure where I was going musically. And so I thought Neil Peart was a cool drummer, but I really didn't think too much about it. To me, Geddy Lee was the guy, you know, and he still is the guy, right, to me. And he with, see, on the first album, now we're just going to do a little bit of talking about their albums. On the first album, I'm going to try to do some props here, just for interest's sake, and because we have the props pretty close by, I didn't go out of my way to get them all ready, only because I didn't see the need to do that. They were here. If I need them, I can just grab them. Yeah, so this was their first album, Rush. And I have the screen backwards, I just realized. Anyways, he did most of the music writing on this, like the lyric writing, and him and Alex did most of the music writing, as John Rutley, who they had assigned originally to do the writing for the band, wasn't really up to it. So Geddy Lee had taken that over, and he's not a bad lyricist. I mean, compared to Neil Peart, he isn't really that great, but of his own volition, he's not bad. And because he had done some writing for the band, it really made his relationship with Neil that much easier later on when Neil was doing all the writing, because Geddy Lee at this point had been writing songs that he knew he could sing within his range and that he could deliver in a way that made them make sense. So by the time Neil was into writing the songs, Geddy Lee knew what part of the song was going to be something he could do and what part he wasn't going to be able to do. And so after a while, they began to when Neil would write the stuff and send it to Geddy Lee, he would read it over and then tell him, can we change this to this, or can we change this to something that's more accessible vocally? And Neil, being the kind of guy who was a really humble guy, said, no, he didn't take offense to any of it. He just rewrote it in a way that was acceptable, and that's, to me, Rush has one of the best kind of musical, if you want to say, working relationship with the three members. One writing, the other two doing the music, and Geddy Lee being the interceptor, the guy who kind of took the writing part and went over it, and then they went back and forth. And when he got that, he would work with Alex on the musical part. So he was kind of the glue of this three, but they all had their parts to do. And there seemed to be a huge lack of ego here. That's why they were still together 45 years later, and nobody else had been in the band, and they had done it all themselves. It's a very unique situation, I think. Anyways, so by the time they got to this album, Neil was writing lyrics. Yes, Geddy was still writing some lyrics and doing stuff too, but Neil was the primary guy. By the time they reached the third album, Caress of Steel, which is also fairly close by, I believe. I remember seeing it. There it is. By the time they got to this album, yes, Neil was writing predominantly almost everything, but they still had some input into the writing. And that to me has remained. Now, there was points later on in their career where Neil would just be doing the writing, and the only writing part they would do was the kind of interception between Geddy Lee and him that would go back and forth till they were able to put it in a way that was still getting the message across, but was able to be delivered by Geddy Lee's voice, right? Now, so for the first, I would say the first probably 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 albums, that arrangement worked very well. Then as they got into the 80s, their musical direction changed. And of course, Geddy Lee's voice began to change at this time too. I don't think it had changed, but it wasn't, he knew it. I'm pretty sure he knew by the time it was in the 80s that he wasn't going to be able to reach those high notes forever. And so some of their music was a little bit toned down, if you want to say. There wasn't the high screeching stuff that you heard in the 70s anymore. They had to learn to use his voice more effectively without straining it to the outer part, right? Very few people can hit the kind of notes he can and be able to hold those notes too and throughout the entire song. I don't know that he could do that anymore, but they changed their music to suit that. They became more of a pop synth band. As one guy jokingly said, they were the remake of the Police in the Canadian style. Unfortunately, there was some truth to that. However, my feeling about them as far as the band goes never really changed over the years. I still really love the band and everything, but I stopped listening to them with the Grace Under Pressure album. I couldn't swallow that album. And so with so many other groups too, it wasn't just them. It was, across the board with all the bands I listened to that I had become enamored with. Yes, being another one. Queen, Black Sabbath. Well, not so much Black Sabbath. They were the one kind of hold out. Their music actually got better as they got been around a little bit. But most of the other bands just kind of petered out, and I began to look for a different direction. But at that point in time, I still liked the guys in Rush. I still liked the music they had done. I still enjoyed listening to that stuff. I just couldn't deal with the synth direction that they went in. And at that point, that was in probably about 82, 83, Yes had taken over as my favorite band, and even they were kind of petering out a bit too. So I went through a phase where I actually didn't really listen to much progressive rock at all. It kind of petered that way until about 1989. I was still kind of listening to some of the stuff here and there and play it, but then by the 1990s, I wasn't listening to it at all. I was completely away from it and listening to not even really listening to rock, but listening to some of this other stuff that I have up here on the top shelf. Some vocal music, some crooning music, all kinds of stuff that my parents had listened to. I just went through that phase where I'm not saying I was completely out of it. I did listen to rock music on occasion, but mostly I was over in there, and I wasn't really even motivated by music too much during the 90s. It wasn't until my daughter was born and I had more time in the car because I was working more that I started getting into more of this stuff. And that's when Rush came back, because somebody had told me that, oh, they're not doing that synth stuff. They haven't done that for a while. You should try this album. And they gave me, I think they gave me the, I just want to see if it's the one. The album I always forget the name of, and I do not know why. But those two, there's two albums in the middle. The red album, this one, Hold the Line, and the other one, this one. I think it's this one. Yeah, it's this one. This was the album that somebody gave me. Actually, they gave me a collection of stuff, which that was the first one I started listening to, and then this one came along. I do not know. Just give me a second. I moved my glasses last night and I didn't bring them back. Sometimes I use them for reading because I only have 3 sets because one set broke. Yeah, Counterparts. This is the album I always forget the name of, and I'm not really sure why. It just doesn't stick in my brain for some reason. So somebody gave me this, and then I started listening to this, and I said, holy mackerel, this is good stuff. And it's back to the way it was, Neil's writing the stuff and Geddy's singing the stuff, and it's really good stuff. Yes, it's not the same producer. Yes, it's not the same kind of progressive stuff that they did in the 70s, but it's good stuff. It's heavier. There is some progressive element to it, but the synthesizers were down a lot, and that I like this album quite a bit. Come back, so that's where it began to get back for me, around the time period of my daughter born. And then in 2006 they released Snakes and Arrows, and that album just catapulted them right back to the top, and they pushed ahead of Yes. Actually, I think they pushed ahead of Yes when they brought this back, because Yes was kind of dead at the time too. It was kind of a turtle derby, and they just pushed ahead, and they've been ahead since then, and it just continued to soar. And by this time, Geddy Lee's voice is very different too. Like, he wasn't singing any of those really high stuff, and in fact, in concert, a lot of the times they were just doing like medleys of those songs from the past, just the instrumental parts too, not really doing the vocal parts too much. And they were just working on the newer stuff that they were doing, which was, I will admit, it was a bit darker, and the voice was much lower, so it contributed to that dark element. Anyways, that's the beginning of my love affair with Rush. Came back at this point in time. Now, many people will say Rush fans are unlike any other fan in the world, other than the Grateful Dead. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. Rush fans are Rush fans, and almost to the point where there's no other band. And, I went through that. I know what that feels like to do that. But am I one of those guys? No. People will say, oh, what kind of a Rush fan are you? Well, I'm a weak one. Let's put it that way. I love their music. They're my favorite band. I listen to them a lot, but I would never, ever claim to be the greatest Rush fan in the world, because that would be a big lie. I'm just not that way. I applaud the guys who've gone to see them 50 or 70 times, who have every single thing they've ever released, who have posters of them everywhere, and that I applaud them for their dedication to the band. And, I think that's great, but that's not me. I'm not that way. I don't have a billion posters and rock musicians all over my thing. I'm not that way. I was, but I am not now. I enjoy their music. I don't think of myself as being the best Rush fan of all. I don't have fantasies about meeting them and telling them how they're my favorite and all that. I don't have that kind of fantasy. They have lives of their own, and they will probably, none of them ever know that I even existed. And that is the way it is. I don't get upset about that. They gave me 19 studio albums to listen to of their stuff. Some of the best, if not the best stuff out there. And some of the stuff I love. This particular album here, I love this album. I know it's not everybody's favorite, but I would probably say I've listened to it 1,000 times. Is that a lot? Probably, but I can see that happening. Same with any of their early stuff. Fly By Night, Rush, Curse of Steel, Farewell to Kings, maybe not as much. And Permanent Waves, definitely. So probably Permanent Waves, Fly By Night, Caress of Steel. I have listened to these three albums ad nauseum. Now, Hemispheres had its period of time, and it's more recent now than it was. I did listen to it at the beginning, and I did listen to it, but it was never one of those albums I enjoyed immensely. But it has come on, and as over time period has moved up as high as third. Now only Fly By Night and Permanent Waves are ahead of it. So it's getting close to that number two, and if not, it probably passed it. So I was never a huge fan of their first album. I did like it. I did listen to it, but I was much more in love with their stuff between Fly By Night and Permanent Waves. That's the era that for me worked. Moving Pictures began to move away from that, and I do like Moving Pictures, but it's not nearly close enough to be one of my greats. The other album that kind of is a bit of an enigma for me is 2112. To me, it went kind of a heavy thing, heavy with some acoustic stuff to it, to this kind of very progressive sounding album, to 2112, which is more like this, and then back to Hemispheres, back to Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres, which is more like this. And those three albums, but for some reason 2112 didn't hold a lot of water for me. I like it a lot more now than I did when I first heard it. I know people are like, what, are you crazy? That 2112 is one of their best songs, and it's definitely one of Geddy Lee's better vocal performances too. But for whatever reason, I like the overture and I like the Priest of the Temple, but for whatever reason, the album never really caught fire with me, and to this day is still kind of an okay. It's definitely a one, but I don't think it has the power to make a masterpiece album, and nor does Moving Pictures, which are probably their two big albums. I just don't feel it for either of them. The rest of the other ones, I love them. And the thing I like most about them is Geddy Lee's vocals, right? Even all the instrumentation, the great bass, the fantastic guitar riffs that Alex Lifeson comes up with, which are second to none. And Neil Peart's like perfect drumming, like all that stuff is great, but it's Geddy Lee's voice that drags me in every time. And he is, without a doubt to me, one of my favorite vocalists. I don't think he's a voice that people are going to think of as great vocalist of all time. It's just, I think I've gotten so used to his sound with Rush that I can't even picture them doing anything without him. It just would be impossible, I think. So some of the other things about Geddy Lee, now they used to live in Rosedale at one time. Now, whether they still do, I don't know. But I'm sure that I got on a bus one time, and he must have taken the bus to go downtown. That's the kind of guys Rush is. They take their limos everywhere and stuff like that. Sometimes they would go out into public and just do the public thing. And I'm pretty sure he was on that bus. Either that or I was hallucinating, which may have been possible in that time period. I don't know. But anyways, I loved it. It's a fond memory for me, even if it wasn't based in reality. I don't even know, right? But yeah, great stuff. There was a period of time where I went through with them, probably when I came back to their music after my daughter was born, where I wouldn't listen to anything else for about 3 or 4 years. Probably when once I've been back for a while and I've been listening to stuff, I went through this phase where that's all I listened to was Rush. My daughter used to go, "Dad, for Christ's sake, anything but them." That's all I would listen to. I just, especially when they came out with the Snakes and Arrows, I was playing that album nonstop all the time. And now I have all their albums. I've listened to them all. Some of them not so much. I still have a problem with the synth era albums. I warmed up a bit to the Grace Under Pressure. I've warmed up a little bit to that. Power Windows, forget it. Presto, forget it. The Red Hold the Line album, there are some tracks on that I don't mind. I don't have as big a problem with that album as I do with some of the other ones of that era. Roll the Bones I've warmed a bit to as well. But mostly I just like the stuff that came from I'm never going to remember this. I don't know why I cannot remember the name of this. Counterparts. From this point on, it's like, to me, there's like 3 bands. There's the experimental progressive. Every album's different from the 1970s. There's the synth era, Grace Under Pressure to Presto. And then there's this album On, which is much harder. They're a harder rock band at this point in time than they were back in the earlier days as well. But Geddy Lee is the glue to this band, although there's a real difference between this band and a lot of bands. One of the biggest difference is that there's a kind of almost a lack of ego. There is, because they don't do anything unless all 3 of them agree. If one of them disagrees, they don't have a vote and say, well, we're voting, yeah, we're going to do it. They don't do that. It's everybody agrees or they don't do it. That's a true democracy. We're brothers, all for one and one for all. Really, they do encapsulate that kind of view. And otherwise, they might still be doing synth music because Neil Peart had no problem doing the synth music. Geddy Lee didn't really have a great deal of problem with it. It was Alex who was getting tired of it and didn't want to do it anymore. So we owe it to Alex that they changed into this, because he's the one that insisted on it, and they wanted to make their bandmate and their brother happy, so they all did it together. I'm sure that if one of the others had said it, they would have been the same. It would have been the same reaction. That's the way these guys are. That's part of the charisma and the romanticism of Rush, is that they are like this. It's not so much the music. Like, if it was just their music and they were the same as every other band, would they still be number one? Maybe they would, but they would be fighting it out with other people. There's no fight here. They're number one, and it's nothing. And it has a lot to do with them being Canadian. It has a lot to do with the way they are with each other. It has a lot to do with them being personal. I know a lot about each of the members. I probably know more about Geddy Lee than the others, because he has a lot of things that I like in his personality. He also has a lot of things he likes that I like his baseball. Me and him are very much the same in that area. I don't collect stuff because I don't have that kind of finances to do that, but I really appreciate history of baseball. I love the game, and I think that's him and me's commonality, other than the music that he produces. Also, Alex, especially those two. Sorry. They grew up in the same kind of area. I mean, they were in the north part of Toronto when I was in the west part of Toronto, but it was still a suburb. It was still very much similar. The places they grew up and went to, I knew of. They weren't that far from me. I could get there in an hour. They even in one of their songs on Curse of Steel, Necromancer, they do the valley through the Don River. I grew up in the West End, and eventually when my parents separated, I ended up living in downtown Toronto, right near the Don River, so I could identify with what they were talking about, and Lakeside Park, of course, in Port Dalhousie and St. Catherine's. Been there many times. Every time I go there, that song comes into my head, right? And just their whole the whole part about them feels Canadian, like they feel like Canadians to me. When they talk about stuff, we have the same kind of sense of humor. The things that interest them are very similar to me. Their experience is that I feel the same way. So there's a connection beyond just their music that doesn't really exist with a lot of the other bands. There are some connections with other bands, but they're a little bit different. But there's none like this one. Even Triumph, who also grew up in Toronto, and that I don't really feel that connection with them. Their music is good, and I like it and stuff like that. And I like them as the trio they are. And I've actually met their bass player, but it doesn't feel the same. They don't feel the same as Rush. To me, Rush is Toronto Canadian boys. Triumph, maybe Toronto Canadian boys, but I don't feel that connection to them. So, and I know there are people out here who really like them a lot, and I like them a lot too, but they're just not that there. It's not that there. Rush is the guys, and that's just the way it is. And I do not have a feel or a connection like that with any other rock band. My connection with some of the other rock bands is different, but with this one, it's more about the band and about their history and about them, Geddy Lee specifically. And this was supposed to be a Geddy Lee thing, but of course, the problem with just doing Geddy Lee is you can't really just do Geddy Lee, because Geddy Lee is Rush, right? And Rush is Geddy Lee. So there you go. Now, he did do a solo album. I did listen to it. And it was okay, but I don't feel the same connection to it that I do to the Rush stuff. And the same with his big book of bass, which is really interesting. Really nice book. But to me, he's still Rush. Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, Neil Peart, that's Rush. There can be no substitute for it. And I'm really happy that Geddy and Alex have decided not to continue as Rush without Neil, because they know, like the guys in Zeppelin knew, that no member can be removed and still be the same. They knew that, and so they didn't try to emulate it or bring it back. Now, in the case of Zeppelin, they did do a one-off with his son. That's a little different. And maybe if Neil had a son, they might do the same thing. I don't know. But I think the two surviving members of Rush will do something else. They may do something together. They may not. They may join in with some other people and do stuff, but they are not going to call it Rush. They won't. It won't even be a hint of Rush, So, not that they haven't done some Rush stuff since when they did the tribute to Taylor Hawking, but I just don't see them touring as Rush ever again. I could be wrong, but I just don't see that happening. And Geddy Lee, I hope he will do some more music writing. I think he's a great music writer. I think him and Alex together are a good tandem. They find maybe one or two other people they can write music with or write the lyrics for. They could do something really spectacular here. There are other great drummers out there. There are keyboardists out there that might fit in with this band very well with these two guys. Maybe another vocalist even. You could really put something special together, but it wouldn't be Rush. And I don't think they would try to make it Rush. I think it would be very different sounding as well. So Geddy Lee, to me, I think and I'm going to put myself on a limb here a bit, but I think he is the best frontman of any Canadian band ever. More than Burton Cummings, more than Neil Young, more than even Miles Goodwin. All these great singers, frontmen for the bands of Canadian origin. But I think he's the number one guy. I don't even think he excels to be that. He's not interested in that at all. But I think he's. When I think of Rush, I think they're synonymous with being Canadian, and I think they would be proud of that. I'm certainly proud that they are that band. That we have a world-class band here that can stack up with the best from any country and come out on top. So Geddy Lee. The other thing about Geddy Lee I really like is that he's very introspective and thoughtful about his comments. He's very loyal to his mother. He's very loyal to his best friend, probably Alex, and his lifelong brother. He's a very loyal person that way. Just a really decent and great human being. I mean, he does have some religious beliefs that I don't share, but that's his belief. But then he respects other people's beliefs too. That's the thing I like about him. Anyways, I think Geddy Lee is a good human being who's produced a lot of really solid music here, and been involved with a lot of really solid music. And he left us with, I have 19 studio albums, half a dozen live albums, some greatest hits and stuff by Rush. I always play Rush. Lately, I haven't been playing any because I've had so many other stuff to listen to, it's very unusual. As my daughter used to say, she says, I haven't heard any Rush for a while. Are you sick? Is there something wrong that I should know? No, it's just when you're doing a channel like this, you have to devote that time that you have to the music that you're trying to promote and to explore. You can't always do the stuff that you want to listen to. There was a time when I would listen to this every day for months, or I would listen to this, have this in my car and play it all day long, right? I don't own a car anymore, so I can't do that. But I occasionally throw Rush on now just for satisfaction, but mostly I haven't listened to them much over the last half a year because I've been so busy with all this other stuff that I'm discovering and learning that there's so much else out there that I don't want to miss out on. Anyways, I think we may be cutting it a little bit short today. And just to let you know, this show will not air next 2 Saturdays because of the holiday season. I will air a holiday video, but it'll be a brief one. But I just won't be around on Saturdays for the next couple of weeks to do this live stream. But we'll be back in the new year, and it'll continue. It may evolve into something else here. I'm not sure if the Rock Legends is the way to go, or just what I'm doing today, which is more of an informal discussion about a particular individual or their band and how they tie in. This was more of a Rush than it was a Geddy Lee thing, but for me, I don't see how you can separate the two. To me, they're the same thing. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this video and this live stream, and make any kind of comments you may have about Geddy Lee or Rush in general if you want. And please like and subscribe. It's much appreciated, and we will be back with another live stream in the new year. So have yourself a great holiday and a festive season, and we will see you then. Goodbye.